Hello and welcome. Hi, Mike. How are you going? Great. I can't hear you, Mike.
Excellent. There we go. How are you going? No worries.
There we
Sorry,
go.
rookie error, not pressing
Welcome.
the
Well,
mute.
let's crack into it. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Modernisation. We've created this podcast to put a spotlight on the rapidly changing business technology landscape during the fourth industrial revolution. On this show, you can expect to hear interviews with leading industry experts where we will discuss business technology trends, news, and advice. For those that don't know me, my name is Robin Leonard, CEO and co founder of AF Digital. AF Digital is an 11-year-old Salesforce reseller, implementation, and managed service provider. We specialize in human experience led business transformation. We help our clients leverage strategic technology ecosystems like Salesforce, MuleSoft, Atlassian, Google. We traverse key pillars across CRM, marketing, data integration, and analytics. We have a very special episode today. I'm joined by Mike Zeederberg from Zuni, and we're going to discuss business alignment to digital transformation. Mike is the managing director of Zuni, a digital marketing strategic consultancy focused on helping clients manage the role of digital within their business and implementing strategies that link to business results. We've worked together on several clients where Zuni supports the business side of the project in articulating the requirement and managing the business change. Mike is also a lead instructor at ADMA, which is the Association for Data-Driven Marketing and Advertising. He's also the adjunct lecturer at UNSW Business School in his spare time. And notably, among many other roles in his background, he spent 8 years working on the digital steering committee for NRMA. Really awesome to have you on the show today, Mike. It's a pleasure. We're really excited to learn from you.
No worries. Great to be here, and nice to have a chat about these types of things. So looking forward to it.
Great. Well, why don't you? I know I gave a bit of an introduction. I'd like to hear it from you. How do you introduce yourself? What's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, no problem. My background is very much working in similar to you guys on the coalface building digital stuff. So I've built lots of websites that nobody's visited, sent out lots of emails no one's read, created banner ads no one's clicked on. I spent sort of 15 years in the trenches making things, and about 10, 12 years ago moved more into the realm of how do we make sure that we're making the right things? How do we make sure that companies are using digital channels in a way that drives business outcomes rather than simply upgrading their website or putting in new emails or giving Google more money. So the focus of our business is very much from an elevator pitch perspective, how to get companies to use digital more efficiently to drive the right types of business outcomes. And we look at that from a number of different lenses. We look at that from the lens of understanding customers, when we do a lot of work around customer journey mapping and customer journey life cycles, around understanding what is the right message to get to the right customer at the right time in the right channel. And then we do a lot of work around, once you know and understand what that approach is, what are the technologies and what are the tools that you can use to actually bring that to life and deliver it.
It's quite there's a lot of different parts to the equation, right? You've got different tools and technology. You've got internal users. You've got these personas, customer journey maps that describe the customer experience. How do you tie it all together and make sense of it all when you're working with customers or businesses?
Yeah, so we generally start with some sort of articulation of what is the key business objective. In the commercial world, that's generally sell more stuff or keep clients buying stuff on an ongoing basis type of thing. Where we work in the not-for-profit space, that could be something more broad. So, for example, with Asthma Australia, it's all around help people breathe more easily or reduce number of hospitalizations. So we start with some sort of key goal or key objective that we know the business has. And then we go, right, if that's your key objective is to sell more stuff, who's your audience? Who's going to buy stuff from you? And then a step below that, what's the customer journey they're on? What's the problem that they're solving where buying your stuff is part of the solution? And how does that journey unfold? What's the trigger to starting them down that path? How do they know that that problem exists? Which channels do they then use? What information are they looking for? What stuff is important to them in making that decision? Why do they choose you rather than someone else? So we use that customer journey to unravel some of the intricacies of how does somebody go about making that space. Once we've got that, that starts giving us some really good understanding in terms of functional requirements by channel. This is the content we need to be on the website. This is the stuff that needs to be in email. This is how people are using search. They're chatting with all their friends on WhatsApp in this sort of way. Yep, TikTok is definitely a place where they're finding out about new stuff and new things. And so you can start understanding from an audience perspective, what are they doing and where are they going? That leads into requirements, which then leads into engaging with the internal stakeholders to say, are these the right requirements and are these the right space?
So it's really what you go through with your clients is a process, and the output being a set of requirements in order to achieve what they want to achieve.
That's exactly it. And then we normally meet the IT department coming the other way, because they've gone out and they've gone and had a look at some cool and exciting technology. And then we've got to try and match those two things together. This is what the business needs to drive the outcomes you're looking for. And are the platforms, systems, capabilities, the right set of technology to drive that in the most effective and efficient way?
Yeah, and I think that's really it's quite a good segue, because that's how our two businesses have really found each other. You know, we found each other through a client that was needing both of our services. And can I just ask you to describe the problem that means they need to find partners like both of us to achieve a business outcome?
Yeah, so quite often for us, the bit that we help solve is that channel agnostic, technology agnostic approach to what to do next. Lots and lots of, and we work predominantly with marketing people, although we also work with boards and those sort of spaces. They know they need digital as part of their engagement and potentially sales channels as how they connect with their customers. But what they don't necessarily have is the skills and understanding of the nuance. How do I use Google versus website versus email versus whatever? And so that's the bit where we start working with them and helping them dig into what that actually means. The challenge they then have is then from the technology side is to say, what is the ideal selection of technologies that allows me to deliver that, but in a cost-effective way with the functionality that I want or need? We work with a range of different clients, ranging from those that are using, and luckily we don't have that many more of them, but my CRM is my Outlook. I still use email as my, and my address book is my CRM, and Outlook is my email marketing client. So, but we work with people who are working on MailChimp and Campaign Monitor, all the way through to big brands like the Sydney Opera House and Hyundai, who are working on the Adobe Marketing Cloud or Salesforce, as you guys do, or Microsoft Dynamics. So there are a wide range of different technologies that people can get into depending on what it is that they're looking for. And sometimes the requirements that they need and the technologies that they choose can get wildly out of sync. So I think that's where we sort of cross over, is you're coming at it from that technology space and about all this capability, what should we do with it? And we're coming from it business space, all this stuff you need to do, which technology do you need to make it happen?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. A good example is I was having a chat today with someone in the office around chatbots, and from our perspective, it takes a day or two to implement a chatbot. Like it's technically not that hard. What's very challenging is making sure it's on brand, making sure it handles the nuances of local culture and what happens if somebody says, I'm going to commit suicide or something really serious that you probably should escalate, and you haven't trained it to do that. So it's all of those things, like 90% of the actual changes in being able to say, this is what we need it to do.
Yeah. And we're the other way around, and that somebody says chatbot and we go, why? Why do you need a chatbot? What role does it play for the consumer? Yes, it's cool, exciting technology, but have you identified that it actually has a need in the customer journey to drive the outcome? And should you be spending and investing money and time and energy on a chatbot when it may be better UX on your form, or a better choice of AdWords in terms of your search terms that's going to drive you better traffic? Because sometimes chatbots can be used as like a string and chewing gum to fix bad website IA. I can't work out how to find the thing I'm looking for, so I have to revert to the chatbot rather than, hey, they're actually a natural part of that consumer buying journey. That means they add value rather than cover up holes.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about the whole robot versus human interaction thing, but for me personally, if I've got an option between a free checkout person at Coles and a free robot at Coles, I'd definitely go the robot because it's just more efficient. I don't have to kind of think about saying hello and how's your day and those kind of polite things.
Yeah.
Some people argue very aggressively in the other way and say, I really need to go to the bank and see my local banker for me to interact. How do you see that kind of shift?
Yeah, I think it's horses for courses. I think it depends on where you are in the process and what you're looking at. So to use the bank example, and we see this quite a lot with when we look at those customer journeys. I'm very keen to find out what the bank's rate is for my home loan. I'm keen to fill in all the forms. I'll do all of that sort of stuff online. But when I'm about to sign my life away for hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'd like to have a chat with somebody to make sure I've actually got it right, if you see what I mean. I'd like
Mm,
that reassurance of actually having that face to face in terms of what it is. So a lot of it depends on the nature of of what's going to happen in that interaction. Obviously, I would much rather self checkout. There's no way I need to actually interact with somebody at a Coles. But
mm,
if I can't find the price on the piece of fruit that I'm looking at, I don't want to have to go through a chat bot and type things in and look up things. I just want to go, hey, fruit, this thing, and get that human intelligence to fix it. So I
mm,
think it really is horses for courses. A lot of the times where people get sent down to a chatbot and have you tried this and look at this and look at that article, look at this article. All you're doing is driving frustration because if you're a
mm.
reasonably competent user, the whole reason you click the contact us button is because the other stuff didn't solve your problem. So you're just going to
Yeah.
land up with somebody who's going to phone you, but they're going to be more frustrated because you made it harder to get in touch with a human being. So it really comes down to where in the transaction is that interaction happening.
Mm. And how do you deal with the differences in perceptions? Like even that example about what my preference is on chatbot versus human interaction. How do you get people on the same page if they have very different opinions on what they prefer?
Yeah, so from our perspective, we tend to lead with the voice of the customer. We tend to create the customer journey which understands about, and we work with clients to work with their customers to understand how many of your what segment of your audience is likely to use a chatbot versus those that aren't. How many people are going to get to this stage in the journey where they really just want to pick up the phone and have a chat with you? What does that look like? And we use qualitative and quantitative research techniques to start being able to understand how big that is. Right, actually 5% of your audience is going to use a chatbot, 15% are going to try and call you, and the rest are quite happy to do it all online. You can then start prioritizing where do you put the money from a tech perspective and where do you put the money from sort of build out and a priority perspective in terms of what that is. Because not everybody wants to use a chatbot, but equally not everybody wants to phone you or not everybody wants to check in. And if you understand the sizing of those different audiences, you can then start creating business cases around, right, we're going to piss off 10% of people, but actually we're going to save that money and put it in here, which has got better outcomes. Or, you know what, those 10%, they're really valuable to us. So absolutely spend the money on the chatbot because that's going to get them over the line.
That's great. So you use as much data and science as you can, and let the customer voice do the talking. Is that what you said?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there within businesses there is a lot of focus group of one. I bought our own product, so I'm suddenly the expert on how people want to buy our product. Very often, the people inside a business are not a good representation of the customer base of that business. So we need to make sure that we bring the voice of the customer into the meeting room that then talks about things rather than it being the person with the greatest authority is the one whose voice carries the highest sway in terms of that space. And we see a similar sort of thing when you land up talking about technology is about, do we go for the all bells and the bells and whistles top end of town technology, or do we go for the technology that's the appropriate fit for the needs that we have? And depending on which level of governance within an organization you're interacting with, that question, that answer changes. Because different people within the organization might have different views on the level of technology needed.
And what's the answer to that question? Because it's a million. That's the $1 million question. Like if you're a small business and maybe less mature in your business processes versus a mid-sized business that needs structure and governance. Yeah, like how do you,
Yeah.
or is it horses for courses?
It is a bit horses for courses, but it's about right sizing the technology. It's about what are the needs of an organization. And very often when people go for a technology choice, they land up with a laundry list of cool functionality we want this platform to do. And that
Mm,
will always take you to the top end because whether that's Salesforce is a fantastic platform. It does loads and loads of really, really cool stuff. But does an organization need all of that cool stuff? Or are they buying it in the vain hope that in the future they might get there? Because
mm,
the thing that stops most organizations is not the technological capability of their platform, it's the skills and resourcing of the people that are using the platform and their ability to actually use it in a way that drives the business outcomes.
that's
So
right.
is it worth investing in really high in really sort of big end systems at the expense of potentially then saying, well, we've invested all that money in licensing, but now we don't have enough money to pay for the resource to actually keep that going. Um, and so we see at a board level, people go, oh, well, no one ever got fired for buying Microsoft. So let's just go Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce or Adobe. And then at a more implementation level, people are going, hang on, we need to get real expertise to make this stuff happen. We need to work with agencies in order to implement the systems and the processes of that. Particularly if they're smaller organizations or things like not-for-profits, we need to employ things like deep end Salesforce skills, and we need people who really know that channel. But now suddenly we're competing with the big banks and the big telcos for that skill set.
Mm,
And why would I go and work for a not-for-profit driving their Salesforce implementation when I could get big bucks working in the city for a bank? And so there are
mm.
other considerations that are often not taken into account when people think about the platforms. How easy are they to learn? How much organizational memory can they create? How easy are they to maintain in terms of where that fit fits?
Mm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, they call it shelfware, where you buy a very expensive license and it sits there unused. And
Yeah.
I've got that in my own business where I've bought licenses, and because my team, for whatever reason, aren't ready to adopt, or we don't have the resources to implement or focus on it, or so I think people often buy this solution before they've really understood the need or the why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's
often
it's
call it
very.
the I was just going to say, we often call it the Ferrari in first gear problem, where people have gone high end. They've bought the Ferrari, it's right there, it's brilliant, but they don't actually have anybody with the skills to drive it. They aren't
Mm.
quite sure where the track is. The mechanics are very expensive. They haven't got the ability to keep it in top notch. And so you're like, you might as well have bought a Mini for the
Mm,
speed and functionality that you're getting out of this Ferrari that you've got. And very
yeah.
often the Ferrari comes with a business case that says, right, we've got to kick some serious goals in order to pay for this thing. We've got to win some
Mm.
races, but if the team can't get it out of first gear, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think of it like a tractor on a farm, and a smart farmer really utilizes his tractor for all sorts of different use cases as much as possible because that's his asset, like, and that he's got to get as much value out of that. A lot of people, I mean, it's the same as the Ferrari in first gear, but if you only use the tractor for 1 hour a day, you're really not getting the value out of that investment. And if you had a robotic tractor that just worked 24/7, even better. Um,
Yeah.
on that note, how are you finding it? A lot of these projects, kind of the outcome of it is automation. Like maybe we don't talk about it that openly, but how do you feel employees within organizations feel threatened by the change of technology?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. We're doing a fair bit of work in the healthcare space, and healthcare are a bit of a laggard when it comes to adopting data and technologies and platforms and stuff. But one of the areas that always comes up is trying to get the healthcare reps and the people who are actually face to face out there talking to doctors and that sort of stuff to capture the data, to put the data back into their Salesforce instance or whatever it is that they're using, so that it can then be used from a meaningful perspective with Marketo or with a marketing automation tool, or even just getting the right emails sent to the right people at the right time. And they see it, they're very resistant because they're like, if I tell you all the stuff out of my little black book, then why do you need me anymore? But
Mm,
what we've found is that if we can work with those teams to actually understand that, well, that means you stop being an order taker and you start being a value creator. If we know what
mm,
you're doing face to face, and we can supplement that with really good digital engagement, be that by email, be that by knowing what people are looking at on the website, so that means we can ping you to say, hey, have this conversation, or this person's right for a phone back, or whatever. We can actually create an integrated communications engagement that helps them meet their targets and helps them actually get to their sales bonuses, rather than we're going to then threaten you with then potentially a threat to the job. So I think in some instances, people do see it as a threat. They do see, right, all this automation is going to take away from that face-to-face. But in 90% of instances where we've seen that implementation, it actually increases the value of the face-to-face, because the automation side of it simply allows you to make the face-to-face more valuable rather than replacing what would be there already. Why spend 20 minutes on the phone giving an order when I can do that myself, but spend those 20 minutes actually understanding more about the process and the next round of technology, or the next product set that's coming out?
Yeah, it's I don't see it. I don't think people see it too often, and I fully agree with you. I think the the whole idea is, businesses have a kind of an EBIT that's usually tied to the variable costs in the business. So it's like, if I can increase my revenue with automation, so if I can do a journey that just adds profit that I wouldn't have had otherwise, and then I do 100 of those journeys, and I don't have any increase in my costs, or it's like very limited, then my EBIT will grow. So that means the business is going to be a lot more comfortable, like the just the ability for it to flourish and not have to be tight with resourcing. From a cost perspective, if you can also reduce the fixed costs in the business, and to an extent, there has to be some manpower reduction to really move the needle in many businesses, because payroll is often a large part of the cost space. But if you can make them more efficient and automate, then you can make that one person very effective, so they can deal with a lot more customers. They can, something that they used to take an hour to do administratively, they can click a button, or it just happens intuitively for them. So but at the end of the day, the technology is really shifting the organization, and providing a kind of a framework for it to operate with. How?
Our experience with that is that, and we used to very often put in business cases around digital transformation, a reduction in costs. That, right, as you say, you can make people more efficient and that sort of stuff. Our experience over the years has been that headcount reduction never happens. You don't actually lose headcount; they get repurposed. And the people that used to be taking calls in the contact center, now they're answering emails, they're working on other things, they're creating content, they're doing stuff. Generally, the repurpose is at a higher value level, because those other things are happening in a more faster and more efficient level. You actually land up creating more value out of that same headcount cost. But we've become quite wary of putting in cost savings at a headcount level into business cases, because it's really hard for businesses to actually achieve those 2, 3, 4 years down the track without having to go through redundancies or those sort of types of things. So we tend to build our business cases now far more on improved efficiency and value creation rather than on cost reduction, because the reality is it's hard to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it positions it a little bit more positively. The technology change as well with all the stakeholders. What, maybe at a board level, when you're going through your process with the stakeholders and trying to help them understand what change they need to do, what are the biggest barriers that you face?
Yeah, so boards are driven by shareholder value, and they're driven by risk. So they need to manage the business risk in terms of what that is. And a lot of boards have got specialists in their particular area rather than specialists in technology. So they have a good understanding of the business operations, but not that much of an understanding of where that all fits together. So sometimes, ironically, where it would seem that it makes a lot of sense for the right sizing of technology to happen, boards tend to often go gold plated in terms of what that is. They tend to go, right, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. Let's go Microsoft. Let's go Salesforce. They consider the limited amount of understanding they have about the technology, mostly driven by very efficient sales teams from the big brands. And then they tend to push in that direction without considering that there may be other options that are better suited to the size and stage of the client. And we often talk to our clients that they're far better off having a Holden that's going in fifth gear with the windows rattling than a Ferrari in first gear that they can't even get out the garage. And so you then go, oh, well, maybe you should consider a HubSpot or look at an active campaign or even think about some of the new stuff that's happening with MailChimp. And everyone goes, oh, no, those aren't sexy. They don't have cool, exciting conferences in Vegas. Right, are you sure that technology is going to be suited for our business? So you sometimes get this interesting dichotomy between what the board is familiar with and what the team are actually looking for in terms of we know Salesforce is great and it does all those things, but it's not as intuitive to use as something where I can just go click, 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 email done. And unless we really need that additional functionality, are we creating a rod for our own back as part of that?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's just, it's really dependent on where the business maturity is. And, if they can afford to have a Salesforce team in-house, great, and it's like a focus. What we struggle with a lot is actually exactly that. When a business isn't resourced correctly, they go, we do want to go down the Salesforce program and really like have chatbots and all sorts of smart things. But then they can't really afford to have a person internally. Like they can't afford to hire a business analyst to really focus on, what processes do I need to change and what requirements do I need to write down and give to the technology people. They often don't have a project manager either. Someone that keeps the internal project on track, like what about the internal comms and training and those kind of things. Often partners like us won't come in and do those kind of services. The client really has to embrace the technology and lean into it. When clients don't realize that, they go out to market and they just buy Salesforce and then they turn it on. Often they aren't successful, they struggle with it. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, we see that a lot in terms of, it used to be the other way around. We used to say, right, I want to send this message to those people, and when these people have done this on the website, I want to be able to follow it up with that, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And marketers had a really good understanding of what they wanted to send to people, and they were actually held back by the technology. Actually, you can't send out those emails, or you can't find somebody again once they've left the website or whatever. Now it's almost the other way around. We have this amazing technological capability. Yeah, absolutely. We can string together a marketing automation customer journey inside Salesforce where we can go, if they've seen this, send them that. And then if they do this, do that with them. And then if they do that, ping something on Facebook and then engage with them here and then use retargeting to do that and then send them this message and that sort of stuff. So the technology has amazing capabilities. But quite often marketers are like, I don't know the answers to those questions. I don't know what the next thing to do with this particular person is. So they don't have as deep an understanding of how and why people buy their products or services that enables them to get down to that level of granularity of then being able to use all the cool, exciting thing in a Salesforce platform, because they've never really had to think that hard about it. We ran some ads and people bought some stuff. What happened in between, we never really worked that bit out. We know it's right. Sort of, and so they then have to go through the thinking about what are those steps, right? Do we follow this up and does that work? That's actually one of the reasons why we work with salespeople. It works better because they often know that. They've mapped that out before, right? I send this thing and then we have that conversation and then they do this and then they get worried about those things. So I follow up with this message and then we do that. And so where you've had more of a face-to-face, it's often easier to unravel. But very often you'll end up with all the gear and no idea. I've got this amazing technology. I just don't know what messages to use it for and how to structure that bit. So hence why we do a lot of that customer journey mapping work, a lot of that, what should we do with it rather than how does that actually come out?
Yeah. And how do you, that's a great point because it's so complicated, the customer journey, and it's not linear. There's all sorts of different paths that you can go down. How do you structure that in a logical way?
Yeah, so and you're absolutely right. All the research says that it's a non-linear process. People bounce around and they go all over the place and that sort of stuff. We generally work with clients to map out what it would look like if it was linear. So, right, you've got awareness, you've got consideration, you've got research, you've got purchase, you've got all of those steps. And we work with clients, and it's counterintuitive. If you look at the marketing textbooks, they say, right, work out what your journey is, then go and research with customers, and then go and do stuff. We actually do it the other way around. We work out what we think the journey is that we need to look at, and then we work with the client to map out what they think happens. So we create an assumptive customer journey where, what do you guys think happens at that research phase? What do you think is happening at the consideration phase? What are you seeing? What do you know? Because none of our clients are brand new to this. Everybody's got an existing business. And inside their business, they often have lots of people who know stuff, whether that's salespeople, whether that's the contact center who are talking to people every single day. If you look at the list of 10 reasons why people phone you in a contact center, 4 or 5 of them are real problems in your customer journey because people have got so frustrated they've resorted to phoning you. And so you can use all of those insights to map out what you think's going on with that customer journey, and then you can work out where you don't know stuff. Right at this bit, we know people decide to come back to us, but we're not quite sure why. What are the top 5 reasons why people would do that? And it's not as complex as you'd imagine. Yes, there are multiple routes, but there's generally only 5 or 6 routes, not 35 routes. There are lots of channels, but there aren't 100 channels. There's 17, if you see what I mean. So if you're comfortable with the complexity, you can work through it to work out what's the 80-20. Where are the ones that matter the most, and where are the bits where if we can fix things, we can move the needle so that we get the business outcome that we're looking for. And it may be actually, right, it's when people move from website to install, or people who are getting the email, but then they're falling over at the basket when they're actually trying to check out, or whatever those things are. You can spot those barriers, and then you can sort of unlock and move them forward. So once we've got the assumptive journey, we validate it. We work with customers. We do qualitative, where we phone people up and ask them lots of rude questions about how they become a customer. We do quantitative surveys, where we try and understand what's going on with that space. We look into the existing data. We think people do this. We think people come to the website to look for this. Let's go and look at Google Analytics and see if that's one of the most trafficked pages. Is that where people are going, or have we got something wrong as part of that? So there are lots of ways we can validate and understand the customer behavior that we can then say, how do we improve the chances that we're going to intersect that journey in a way that results in a positive outcome for the business?
That's great. It's you hear a lot of people saying voice of customer, right? And it's kind of like, if you were to think about that overall life cycle and just doing quick surveys or any kind of signals you can get through data throughout that to indicate, where are the rub points or pain points. So once you've identified kind of what you should do, how do you prioritize what gets done? Obviously, you'd have a long laundry list.
Yeah, we tend to do it in 3 different ways. One is if we fix that problem, how much value does it add to the business? So is that likely to see a step up in conversion rate, or is that likely to suddenly give us access to a bunch of email addresses that allows us to do later marketing? Or so value to business is one. How much value does it add to the customer? If we fix that, will that stop people being really frustrated with us or annoyed, or are we creating something that's going to step us away from the competition? And then the third bit is fairly clearly, how hard is it to fix? Is that something we can fix by adjusting stuff on a form or just updating things? Or, you know what, we need a whole new CRM in order to enable that type of functionality. So once you've got that laundry list, you can start prioritizing stuff based on the value it's going to deliver and the ease of fixing it. And we generally land up with a roadmap that's somewhere between sort of 6 to 18 months of an evolution of stuff that happens. And they're generally interconnected. If we fix stuff that's going on with the way we capture data, that means we can start doing the email over here. And once we've got that, if we've got the content, that started working up here, so we can start feeding that content back in here. And when we've got those signals, we can then turn on some stuff in social media. But at the same time, we're hoping by then we will have upgraded the website so we can add those bits in. So you land up with this sort of sequential plan of stuff to fix so that it gets better over time, rather than it's a one-off project. Once we've done it, the world's your oyster and off we go. It tends to be an ever-improving digital ecosystem that gets better rather than a one-off thing.
And would you apply like an agile kind of process to that?
Yeah, often there are sort of streams of work. So we've got a project at the moment where we've got a stream of work happening all around the data, and then we've got a stream of work happening around the CRM platform and about where that data is going to go. But then there's also a piece around the content and how they're improving that side of things. And then a piece around the website platform and how the web platform and the apps and the shop and everything all work together. So each of those is almost agile in its own way, but you need to just make sure they're interconnected and they keep pace with each other, if you see what I mean. At the same time as we get to the point with the CRM platform, we know what we're doing. We want the data and content project to be able to say, and this is how you need to put it. That data goes against these people in that space. It's like, excellent. We've got the CRM ready to go. We can merge those 2 streams and off we go. It tends to be and I really hate the term, but it tends to be wagile. It tends to be waterfall pieces that then
Yeah.
are agile in their nature. So agile tends to talk 1, 2, 3 week sprints type of things. These tend to be more 1, 2 month types of implementations, and then an alignment stage where they all readjust,
Mm.
uh, rather than it's as where you're looking at an individual piece like a website or that sort of stuff. You can go full agile, but in general, it's more let things run for a longer than your traditional sprint, and then reassess and then reevaluate and then make sure you're
Mm.
heading in the right direction.
Yeah, certainly with digital marketing activities, there's often a lot of predecessors, and you've got to do five things before you do that one thing, and it does often become a little bit easier if it's just in a Gantt with a critical path. But the ceremonies, I agree, it's just like having that constant iterative review cycle, right? The concept of
And
agile.
And often alongside that, there is an internal change management process, and there is an internal process improvement element. Because very often the problem is not the platform, the problem is the processes and the people and the skills that are using the platform in terms of how that works. So, whilst
Mm.
we sometimes get a bit focused on the technology project, there is often a people project that sits on top of that. How do we get everybody on board with that? How do we get them trained up? How do we get them believing that this is going to fix their problems? What skills do they need as part of that? How are we going to manage the processes that use the platform rather than just allow people onto this amazing platform with great functionality, and 3 months later there's just random stuff everywhere because everyone's just used it as a sandbox. So there's that organizational capability that needs to be alongside the implementation of the technology piece that then means that it lands up having a chance of success when it all gets to the end.
It's like giving birth to a child, and just giving it the most chance of success in life. Um,
Exactly.
how do you deal with ownership? Like you said before, you've got multiple streams and kind of following an agile process. Who owns the things? Is it like the platforms, the experiences? How do you do that with clients?
The best projects or the most successful projects tend to be, and we work primarily in the marketing space or in the external stakeholder engagement space. So mostly where businesses are engaging with external stakeholders, be they patients in the case of not-for-profits or customers or clients. It tends to be marketing and IT very closely working together, and aligning agendas and making stuff work. And then with significant buy-in from whoever owns the products, as it were, whether those products are brand or service delivery or whatever that is. And so having that sort of senior steering committee of who's, and then a fairly equitable breakup of, right, so your stream, the technology stuff, implementing the platform or changing the CRM, that's the IT side of things. The content and what data we're going to need, that's the marketing side of things. But those two teams need to keep crossing over to make sure there's alignment. So it tends to be a very collaborative process inside the organization where both of those areas are well bought into what's going on and then collaborating in terms of that direction, but with strong oversight and agreement from the senior leadership team or the board of directors or whatever that executive layer is, because you need to suck in all the other people around that, the product teams and the service teams and the contact centers and that sort of stuff. They need to be aligned to that as well. So, and that's why I say quite often the change management piece is quite important, because you need everybody on board in order for it to successfully roll out, rather than, hey, the marketing manager said this is good, so off we went.
Yeah, and that's really where your work comes in, right? Because you come in to help them understand across those functions what is the current experience and what is the future experience, and then how do we get there? But how do you get that change to occur in all of those minds? At what level do you need to plant those seeds or facilitate that discussion?
Most, if you keep coming back to the key business objective that you think this is going to fix, then you get board buy-in and executive leadership team buy-in. So we'll very often make sure that that sort of transformational strategy is highly aligned to whatever the strategic plan is that is the organization is running to, whether that's 5 pillars over the next 5 years or whatever that is. If you've done it right, and you should easily be able to say, the implementation of Salesforce and a new CMS and a this and a that actually all enables strategic pillars 2, 3, and 5, because without
Mm.
them we can't deliver deliver whatever those things are. So at that very top level, it's about alignment to business objectives. It's about alignment to strategy and how does that work. When you get down into things like the IT and the marketing teams and that sort of stuff, very often part of getting those systems in place will fix stuff that really frustrates them. It's easier to get the job done. There's more automation that's going to have there. You're doing less merging of stuff in Excel so you can see a report, because that's all going to be dealt with by the system. You've got the ability to more quickly and easily create segments and send out emails than you do currently. So the potential improvement in their working lives that is still aligned to those objectives tends to bring them on board in terms of, yeah, that wouldn't it be great if I could do my job more effectively and efficiently in terms of how that works. And again, as that sort of rolls out, we then feel like we're doing things that are going to move the needle forward and ultimately make the business successful, which is good for all employees. So it depends on which piece of the business you're working with as to what's going to be their primary driver.
That's really good, and that's a really good reminder to come back to those business objectives, and especially if you've got that from the board, then no one can really argue with that. What, Mike? I'm curious. Obviously, your clients engage you because they don't have your skill set internally, but if they were to, what is the department or the job title that you would have?
Yeah. So often the skill set we've got would sit under head of digital, but it depends on where head of digital lives, if you see what I mean. And we talked earlier about the idea of the marketing team and the technology team or the IT team over here. And what we do is often a bridge between those two teams. It's about, right, we understand the technology, we understand the marketing objectives, and how do we then create the right frame for those things to cross-connect. Some bigger businesses have marketing technology teams. So IT will end up doing more of the infrastructure, more of the back end stuff, and the marketing technology team are that crossover between that sort of space. The other area the types of stuff that we often get involved in is actually at business strategy level. So if the business has got an insights and strategy team, we'll end up working with them in terms of that customer journey, customer experience. What does that look like? So we sort of connect the dots between a number of different spaces in terms of that area. But if you were to replace me internally, that would often be sort of head of digital strategy, would probably be the sort of area that would be that it would be internalized into.
It's interesting because you've got these traditional departments, IT and marketing, and they are strong. Like they aren't going away anytime soon. But the future organization is kind of a bridge between them, and it's also there's kind of a few of them. There's a customer experience kind of bridge of marketing and IT, but you've also got partner experience, which is kind of the same but different. And then employee experience is another type of experience, and who's responsible for that? HR need to work with IT, and who's going to bridge them?
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting problem.
The customer experience piece is a really interesting one because that comes up, that's often a very key part of it. But the customer experience is often, IT is only a piece of that. Because if you then also got face-to-face customer experience or branches or in-store or any of that sort of stuff, it's a broader remit, if you see what I mean. So, yeah. And quite often, although we generally start from a digital perspective, the customer journey maps that we do are channel agnostic. At this point, they talk to each other face-to-face, or they walk into a store, or they buy from a retailer or whatever. So the customer journey is completely agnostic of which channels you're playing in. So the customer experience piece is again, and it's pretty cool at the moment. It's quite hip to have a customer experience officer and to be focused on the CX as your point of difference, where people are losing the ability to differentiate by product. Can you differentiate by customer experience? Can you make that work? So that's another big area that this sort of plays into is that how that journey mapping works, and then off the back of that, how can you differentiate? Because if you can find a really strong pain point and frustration in your customer journey, that's gold, because then you can differentiate. You can use that either to create margin, or you can use that to create a point of differentiation compared to your competitors. If you can work out where those really horrible bits are for your customers and you can deal with that, that's a really strong opportunity. That's where the innovation is.
That's really exciting. What do you think, Mike, about product managers owning the experience as a product, or organizations thinking of the experience as a product?
Yeah. The challenge that product managers have is that they are measured by generally sales of product, if you see what I mean. So there is a very strong measure of you need to sell X number of widgets or boxes or whatever that is. And then there is a bunch of customers. But sitting next to you are the 4 or 5 other products that sit within that organization. So they tend to be quite focused on what is my product, how does it differ from the competition, and how do I tell people they should be buying it. Sometimes they are almost in competition with the other products in their stable because they're all using the same database and they're all trying to talk to the same people. And so they tend to go, if I tell people about my product often enough, they will be more likely to buy it, rather than going, let me understand what role my product plays in solving problems that my customer has and work out where it fits in as part of that. So most businesses are very solidly product, all their metrics are about products. I can tell you how many products I sold, but I can't tell you which customers bought 3 or 4 products across a range of different products within our organization.
Mm.
Most businesses don't have the metric capability to be able to do customer-centric metrics as opposed to product-centric metrics. And the more we can use customer journeys to cut through there, the more interesting it gets. You start looking at a customer's life cycle engagement with a business across multiple products. People like the banks, the telcos, they've started to work this out, if you see what I mean, because
Mm.
they start measuring things like number of products per customer. If we've got your savings account with us, can we get the home loan? Can we get the credit card? Can we get your super? The more we can get you into a stable, the less likely you are to churn, the more value we can see in terms of understanding, the more we can cross you over. So they've started to get reasonably good at that. But even so, they still have completely different teams working on
Mm.
those products that then struggle to cross correlate in terms of messaging and engagement in different spaces. Ironically, it's easier to do in a small business than in a big business. Because you don't have as many skill sets in the different product areas. So product owners struggle with things like customer journeys because they're not allowed to own the whole customer journey. They only own the
Mm.
bit that is related to them actually selling things. And so it becomes more difficult for them to go in an end-to-end type of engagement, and they tend to default back to the 4 Ps and how do I tell you to buy my stuff.
Mm. Unless it was a cross-functional product where it was like I own the entire acquisition experience of a customer or the retention experience or something like that.
Yeah, so what businesses do in response is they put together, as you say, acquisition teams who are cross-product, retention teams who are cross-product. We're even
Mm.
seeing segment teams. So my job is to target young millennials, or my job is to target the elderly segment, or whatever. Because by then having a team responsible for a particular audience segment that's cross-product, cross-channel, and cross-function, they start really understanding that particular audience. So you sometimes get brands where we've got product people, but then we've got segments, or we've got acquisition teams. But even there, in bigger organizations, they'll end up getting quite siloed. The
Mm.
retention team always blame the acquisition team because they can't keep people because they acquired all the wrong people. They got salespeople in because they had a low rate, and so they're impossible to keep as a retention space, or those sort of things in terms of how those teams work together. You need that holistic space, which is why, as I say, often this comes at a level of business strategy, who have that holistic view across the products and services rather than more in terms of product teams.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I think we're running out of time, but Mike, if any of our audience want to reach out to you and talk to you, how do they get in touch with you?
Best thing to do is probably just jump onto LinkedIn and stalk me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's my channel of choice, as it were. I've managed to stay clear of Twitter for the last while because I got deeply sucked into that world, but I've been clean for a bit. So LinkedIn, or just go to zuni.com.au and send me an email. Ironically, anything at zuni.com.au will probably land up in my inbox. Hey you at Zuni will also work. So yeah, just get in touch and yeah, love to have a chat.
Great, thank you, and thank you so much for coming on the show today.
No worries. Thanks for inviting me. It's been really fun to talk about it all.
Awesome. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.